All right. Howdy, everyone. Kyle Chambers with Texas Quality Assurance here for our QMS Bootcamp video this week. So this week, we are talking about the idea of risk-based thinking. Now, risk-based thinking, this is a bit of an odd term. The truth is, risk-based thinking really didn't appear anywhere until the 2015 edition of the ISO 9001 standard. It seems as though it was almost made up to fill a gap or a void. And perhaps, there's some truth to that. But then we have to ask ourselves, what is that gap or void that it's filling? And that, to me, is fairly clear. Our organizations are meant to do more than just respond to compliance needs. We have to respond to risk. But how do you respond to risk without going into a full-blown risk management standard, which does exist? But let's be honest, if you're a machine shop with 50 employees, it might be a bit overkill to have a full-blown risk management and risk mitigation plan. So how do we get the benefit of accounting for risk, integrating it into our system, but not hamstringing the company with too many requirements and complications? So the idea is risk-based thinking. Unfortunately, the standard doesn't detail what it is very well. And I personally have seen several instances where organizations have gone what I consider not be a very optimized or effective route in addressing the idea of risk-based thinking. Probably the first thing that I see in these shops is that they have a very lengthy risk register. In fact, a lot of auditors have come to asking questions straight on the audit of, can you please show me your risk register? Now, I have an issue with that. And here's the issue, is any improvement action, regardless if this is a purely preventative action, whether this is a response to a nonconformity, whether this is a response to a customer requirement, risk is involved. Risk, it's two sides of the same coin. We have a risk and we have an opportunity. Failing to pursue the opportunity has a risk associated with it. Pursuing a risk, we don't pursue something with a risk for no good reason. Even thrill seekers who base jump without, any safety equipment, there is an opportunity on the other side of it. Most of us could not justify that opportunity, but there is. There's an opportunity for thrill, for engagement, for fun. So no risk is undertaken without opportunity on the flip side. So when you begin to think about risk and opportunity as two sides of the exact same coin, perhaps not always in balance, the idea of risk-based thinking begins to make more sense. And this is the reason that I am harshly against the idea of a risk register. It is one thing to identify risks at the start of a project, but to have a singular register of all risks for the entirety of your organization simply to meet the supposed requirements of the ISO 9001 2015 standard, it just doesn't make sense. But that's what we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about how do you incorporate risk-based thinking into your everyday practices of your organization without creating extra paperwork, doing a better job at mitigating risk, a better job of improving, and just getting back to doing work that matters. So that's what we're going to discuss. So we'll dig into this a little bit here. And today I'm going to be experimenting a little with some different camera tricks. So we'll see how this works here. So let us take a look at the board. So we have here risk-based thinking. And this is a very important term because this is all about how you think, how you perceive risk, and not necessarily a risk management standard. So again, let's look at this as two sides of the same coin. On side A is risk. On side B is opportunity. So let's think. What are some risks that we might run into in our organization? You can think from a sales perspective. We're going after a new business venture that we've never done before. Well, there's lots of opportunity or we wouldn't consider it. But if it goes poorly, we wasted time and resources over here and did not achieve what we were looking for. So effectively, this is what risk-based thinking is we want to incorporate these ideas and this balance into our everyday actions. It's not so complicated pretty quickly. But what are some practical skills of doing it? This is something that I absolutely hate when I watch these videos or read books. They present this great idea, but no practical, real world, how do I actually implement this in my workplace? So that's what we're going to talk about here. So how do you incorporate this? Well, we have a lot of great options. For one, if we're taking a look at the design and development aspect of our management system, you're not going to pursue that without an opportunity on one side, and you better daggum know what your risks are up front. Otherwise, you can wind up spinning your wheels, wasting thousands and millions of dollars on research and development without getting that gain at the end. And what's that gain? It's your opportunity. So that's a great opportunity to look at this. Is what are the risks going in? We know what we want to get out of it. Where are all of the opportunities where something could go wrong? Where could we potentially waste time and effort? When you identify those locations where you could be wasting time and effort, where maybe there's some safety risks involved or some legal risk involved, you then have a bulleted list that you can take action against. And this is a fantastic, fantastic tool. Now, does this require a company-wide risk register? No. Does this require a background in risk management? No. Do you even have to use a tool such as an FMEA? No. All of these things could be beneficial, but they're not required to do the job. We simply must think about risk in every aspect of our business. Again, understand that risk and opportunity are two sides of the same coin. So if we have an opportunity, we have to make sure that the risk is not outweighed and vice versa. Unfortunately, and having been a safety manager for years, safety managers so often get caught up on the risk side. Now, I am not advocating letting your employees get injured. I am advocating know your risk, mitigate your risk with the goal of achieving your opportunity in mind. So design and development, fantastic area. As you go through and develop your various safety procedures, whenever you put a rule, do not do this, place a sign here, and these such ideas, be sure that the risk and the opportunities are in balance. So let's go a little bit further. If we are going to have a non-conformance report, this is one of our favorite ways to do it. And we actually do this in the TQA Cloud QMS software that we provide. And whether you use our software or your own Word document for your NCR, it doesn't matter. This is a great tool. So what we do is we will choose to identify our risks by the severity, the likelihood, and the detectability. So severity is all about how bad is this risk. And so I like to rate these on a 1 to 10. I did not come up with a system. I just like using it and I found benefit over the years. So a 1 being good and a 10 being very bad, if not dead. So 1's as good as it can get. 10's as bad as it can get. If we want to apply a little more technicals to this and get a little more quantitative value, you can consider a few things. We can put this on a scale of a 1 to a 1 in 1.5 million. But we'll get there. So severity. How bad is this? A 1 being happy and a 10 being terrible. Okay. So severity, let's have a fun example, and we'll play around with this here in a little bit, and you'll get to see some fun artwork of mine. But many people are afraid of going in the ocean. They're afraid of sharks. They're afraid of jellyfish. In fact, the last time we went to the beach, my wife got stung by jellyfish. We also caught one and put it in the bucket and made a bet with my son that if he picked it up by the head, we'd pay him $20 in any case. The whole other story, but he perceived the risk of getting stung was worth the opportunity. He's perfectly fine, by the way. It was just a little nettle that just stings a little bit. Nothing bad. In any case, you have to weigh these. So let's use the example of going in the ocean. We are afraid of getting bitten by a shark or stung by a deadly jellyfish. Okay. Well, the severity of what could occur is pretty high in that instance. So if we did get bit by that shark or stung by that jellyfish, it's not necessarily going to kill us. So we can't go with the 10, but it's going to be bad. So we'll give that shark bite an 8. Okay. Now let's look at likelihood. How likely are you to get bit by a shark or stung by a potentially deadly jellyfish? Now, I very, very briefly have looked at the numbers here, but we're looking at about a 1 in a 1.5 million chance of this happening. Not many people get bit by sharks or stung by deadly jellyfish compared to the number of swimmers on an annual basis. So we're going to give our likelihood here a 1. Now, if likelihood's a 1, our severity is an 8, detectability. How good are you at knowing if there are sharks or deadly jellyfish in the water before you get in the water? Well, if you're swimming at public beaches, they've got the hazardous marine life sign that they can fly. So that helps out a lot. So you have a good idea ahead of time. Now, if you're swimming, completely off the radar, we're not going to discuss it here. So we're at a public beach, and they do a good job of letting you know when potentially hazardous marine life is available. So the detectability here is pretty good. So we're on our smiley face side over here. So detectability is pretty good. But let me say, I have personally seen jellyfish in the water when there was no sign. And Lord only knows how many more were there that I did not see. So we'll be a little generous here, and we'll give this a 2 for detectability. Now, if this was incredibly difficult to find, if you have any kids, you will understand Legos on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. are completely undetectable until you step on them. So I'd for sure give Legos a 10 for detectability. But our jellyfish and sharks, pretty easy to detect at a public beach with all the proper protocols in place. So I give it a 2. So what's our risk of this shark attack? Well, our risk here, what we do is we effectively multiply these 3 numbers together. So 8 times 1 gives us 8. 8 times 2 gives us 16. So this is what we call our RPN, risk product number. So it is the product multiplication of all of our risk factors. And here we get a 16. Now, this can be a very, very, very valuable tool, especially with nonconformities. You have to decide, is this worth a corrective action to prevent a reoccurrence in the future? And this is where I tell people you have to identify what your risk appetite is. You will find larger companies have a smaller risk appetite, generally speaking. The possibilities for lawsuits and such are higher. The public exposure is higher. So larger companies oftentimes have a much lower risk appetite. Smaller companies or more innovative, more entrepreneurially minded companies typically have a higher risk appetite. They're willing to accept more risk to pursue the same opportunity than someone else will. So again, to you health, safety, environmental managers out there, you need to know your risk appetite. How much risk are you willing to accept before you put a preventative measure in place? So I would argue, let's see if we can jot this up here. I might need to get a new sheet here in a moment. So I would argue that our risk appetite, I can't spell, so I hope that's spelled properly. A very conservative number is 60. I argue most of our clients should go for a 100. And if you are the very adventurous type, be careful about it. You might could go as high as 120 before you felt the need to put an additional measure in place. So what's this mean? This means that here, let's assume that the likelihood of our attack were to go up a little bit and the detectability were to go up a little bit. Perhaps you were swimming at a beach known for attacks. well, then our likelihood can go from a 1. Maybe our likelihood here will go to a 3. And our detectability. Maybe this is a beach known for it, but you don't have the staff of lifeguards and folks that are generally out there. So here, our detectability is going to go up. So it's going to be a lot harder to find these things because no one's telling you about it. You have to pay attention with your own eyes. So here, let's move the detectability up to a 5. Well, now, we have a very different ball game that we're working with here. You know, we have, 15 times 8. So I am no good with math in my head at all. And I do not want to make a simple arithmetic error on YouTube for everyone to see. See, this is why you did times tables in school, right? So you don't ever forget these things. I kind of slacked there. So yes, this is going to give us our 120. So even for you adventurous types out there, this is something you need to be concerned about. You might want to take additional safety measures, regardless where your risk appetite is here. You might want to take additional safety measures to mitigate that risk. Now, mitigate does not mean remove. Mitigate means take actions to prevent. So perhaps here, if it's sharks you're worried about, maybe you want some sort of shark repellent in the water. If it's jellyfish, perhaps you want to ensure that none of your skin is exposed. And so we could take those mitigation efforts. So if we ensure that none of our skin was exposed, we can move our severity down. If we wanted to put shark repellent in water, we can move our detection down. And you're going to want to do this until you can move that risk to a level that you are satisfied with, that gives you that RPN that works for you and works for your team. Now, we have taken the time, and I'm not going to go through it for this video, but we have taken the time here at Texas Quality Assurance to actually quantify what exactly is a 1 for severity, what's a 3 for severity, what's a 10, and all the way through from detectability. If we go up to a 10 on detectability, that effectively means that we've got more than a 50% chance of it occurring. I'll go back to the Legos example. I have 3 kids. I can tell you on any given day, there is almost a 50% chance that I'm going to step on a Lego. If the kids have had friends over for the weekend, we are for certain at a 10 on the detectability because there it is guaranteed that we're going to have a Lego in the house. So these are just some basic ideas you can think about, again, for risk-based thinking, is how do we incorporate these ideas of risk into our organization so that we can take the appropriate actions. Now, when you do this, and we'll go ahead and get a new sheet here. All right, hopefully that noise isn't too terrible on the mic here. So if we're looking, again, risk-based, thinking, because we're always thinking about risk as we take actions. Let's talk about the areas again, brief recap of where we have defined that we might want to consider risk. So we have our design and development program is a big one. We have our non-conformance reports, definitely worth considering your risk. And you're going to make the determination with that non-conformance report. Is this worth pursuing a corrective action? So let's talk about that. We have our corrective action reports. Perhaps for your organization, they are corrective and preventative action reports. That is a whole other video that we will address, but for today's purposes, they are the same report. A corrective preventative action is put in place for a very similar reason. Why are you going to make a change in your organization to prevent something from occurring if that something is of such low consequence on risk as to not merit mitigation? Unfortunately, this is fairly common. Organizations will oftentimes put corrective actions into place when the risk simply does not necessitate those actions to be completed. This really should have been a one-time fix, move on, track and trend, and see if it occurs again. The amount of time and effort that you may place into preventing that action, the additional holdups and hiccups and hangups in the process procedures and work instructions you develop may not simply be worth the effort that you're going through. So definitely something to consider. But then when you go through your corrective and preventative actions, we want to have a pre and a post mitigation. We want to have a pre and a post risk mitigation. And the idea being that if the pre-mitigation is above your risk appetite, so again, let's assume you've got a risk appetite of 100 for your organization, any NCR with a risk higher than 100, we're going to fix with a corrective action. Let's say that we were at that 120. Let's use the same shark bite example here. So we're at 120 pre-mitigation. Post-mitigation, when you have defined your forever method for swimming in these waters, we want to make certain that that post-risk mitigation or that post-mitigation risk assessment is less than 100. So if we can move this down to an 80, that would be absolutely fantastic. And we could feel safe and happy that this corrective action was effective. And this 1 point is something that we see probably more than any other problem as we go through and do internal audits, is folks put corrective actions in place, but they do not take the time necessary to verify the corrective action was effective. Let me tell you, as an auditor, having been an ISO auditor for years, this is a fantastic, not the only, but a fantastic method for verifying that your corrective action was effective. If you can clearly show with quantitative data what the risk was before mitigation, what the risk was after mitigation, and then show the evidence of the updates to the procedures, the checklist, the trainings, whatever it was that you did, you have verified that that corrective action is effective very, very well and quantifiably. This is no longer anecdotal information, and it's just a fantastic way to move forward. Now, none of this is really anything terribly new. I don't think this is new information for anyone. But I think with the context of risk-based thinking, a lot of organizations that we've worked with could really, really benefit from this. So let's go a little bit further. We'll take a few minutes here. Let's go a little bit further. What are some other areas where you can make some substantial improvements to your organization by risk-based thinking? Not full-blown risk-based management, but risk-based thinking. Well, we've got design development, non-conformance reports, corrective action reports, the pre and the post mitigation on your corrective action report. Really, the only thing left is going to deal in some of the EHS areas that we might encounter with legal requirements that you might encounter. And again, this is something we see fairly often and that organizations will take many times too many steps in one direction to mitigate a certain risk, but that comes at the expense of mitigating other risks. And this happens a lot in health and safety, environmental management, because we know the big ticket items that everyone talks about. But your organization is different from the last one you were at. So if we spend too much time overcorrecting, we're oftentimes leaving ourselves open for problems in other areas that we really just simply did not expect. So just again, a little bit of food for thought here. And if you have any questions on this, if you've got any additional comments, please feel free to contact me directly. The links will be in the show comments here for my LinkedIn page, email, web address, everything. Let me know if you've got any comments, any questions, want any feedback off of it. I'll be happy to help you in any way that I can. Of course, if you've ever got a project that requires more than a few questions to be answered here, let me know. We can talk about getting one of our consultants or auditors out there to work with you a little bit more directly. But really appreciate your time here and look forward to talking again on the next QMS Bootcamp.